Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 80 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. Today's tip comes to us from special guest Diana Wink. Thread a story throughout your talk.
My tip is tell a story, and I'd recommend tell it from the beginning on. So when you enter the stage, start with a short but powerful story. And the story is a story that will help you tie into your presentation and your topic of your presentation. It can be a personal story, something that people can relate to. It can be whatever story there is, like when your car crashed or when you stood at the supermarket and your credit card wouldn't work or whatever, just some situation people can relate to, some story and a simple story as well, where a person just goes from A to B, and having a problem. And then you can, with this story, you can go into your topic and connect the story to your topic. And this is really powerful because this is how you catch the attention of your audience at once.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from Diana Wink. Welcome back. Diana Wink is not primarily a stage speaker. She's a fiction author who helps other folks unlock their creativity and learn the craft of story. So why is she on a public speaking podcast? Well, it's because storytelling is such a powerful tool in the speaker's arsenal. I say often that facts tell while stories sell. And this week I'm delighted to have the story artist on the show. Storytelling is how you take a collection of facts and turn them into an experience that will last with your audience. Imagine you are one of 5 speakers at an event. You're number 4 on the agenda, and each speaker before you shows and reads 30 content-heavy slides in 20 minutes each, analyzing, say, a customer experience. They've got a lot of data there, and you can tell it's a lot of data because the audience's eyelids are getting heavy. Then you take the stage with a thin 5-slide deck, and you start with a blank screen. As you talk, a few other pictures pop up from your slide deck, which is largely images to help you tell your story. You talk about Marie, a customer who was having trouble making her baguettes. It was taking too long, and her customers were starting to go elsewhere. You talk about how Marie's business was struggling. Customers were rushing her and getting angry before leaving. And then you talk about the work you did to figure out what was taking so long. Your product identified a problem with her oven, and then you go on from there. You tell the story of Marie's bakery and how she used your product in the real world to sell more baguettes. And then the next speaker comes up and shows lots of really pretty charts. At the end of the morning, will your audience be more likely to talk about the charts, the data-heavy slides they almost napped through, or about Marie's baguettes? You see, telling a story makes your presentation more compelling and memorable. And Diana specializes in stories. Diana Wink is a mountain child from the depths of Middle Asia, striving to kidnap her readers into make-believe worlds, blend the borders between past and future, and master her own curiosity. In her spare time, she directs movies and rewatches Christopher Nolan films, empowers creatives to tell stories themselves, and explores theaters, cities, and wilderness with her bearded dancer husband. They have their base in Germany, but who knows where they are currently to be found. Now, let's meet Diana Wink. So Diana, welcome to 2-Minute Talk Tips. I am thrilled you can join us this week.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really excited about the interview.
Awesome. So one of the things I talk about a lot with folks in public speaking is the importance of telling stories as part of how they're going to make their point or illustrate something or keep their audience engaged. And I think your role with a huge focus on storytelling, it provides just tremendous value to that. So I guess to begin with, how did you get into storytelling?
Yeah, so I was always someone who loved stories. I guess it started with my mom reading out loud to me always. So to all parents out there, read to your kids. It's such a valuable time, such a valuable thing to do. And I started writing when I was, I don't know, around 6 or 7. I wrote my first poems and stories and short stories, and I just love that. And I started reading books, then read many books about storytelling later on in school and in university. And but I actually started with making films after school. I studied I studied media technology and filmmaking in London. And I wanted to tell stories visually on film, but I quickly realized that it's quite complicated when it comes to budget and finance. And, films are always costly. So I came back to my initial passion, I'd say, and started to write and tell stories and write novels. And started my blog then.
Awesome. It's really interesting how that stuff just really gets into you at an early age. Apparently, when I was about 6, I wrote my first picture, quote unquote, book about tanks or something. And what's really cool these days is that the technology has made it so much less expensive and made so much audio and video technology so much more accessible to folks in a way that it never has before. It really starts taking out some of those technical barriers and really lets people start to focus on the elements of storytelling itself and really think about content more than technology at the amateur and beginner level.
Yeah, definitely. And what I also love about this whole new technology thing is the possibility of self-publishing, basically, that everybody can publish their work online without having to go through the gatekeepers, I'd say. And everybody can have a voice online, which is amazing, I think.
What I talk to speakers about is that, in the past, you had to wait for somebody else to give you a stage. Now you can go ahead and just make your own stage, start a podcast, start a Facebook channel, start a YouTube channel, and just do it.
Yes. And it's so amazing. It's so cool. And if you do it right, and if you deliver great content, I think you can have an audience pretty quickly, basically. And the audience is from all over the world, which is another bonus, I think.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and it's just striking that, you and I are speaking from opposite sides of the planet, and it's all made possible by this technology.
Yeah. It's amazing.
And what I think is really interesting, too, is it's so easy to get started with this stuff. It's not as easy to do it well.
Yeah, that's true, though. I agree. I definitely agree, because you have to work your way in there. And I think there might be an overwhelm on the other side, because there's so much technology and so many things you can try out that you don't know where to start and what's good and what's not. And you have to stay informed and you have to dive into this whole thing. I don't know if you want to start a YouTube channel, which camera do I buy?
Right.
Then that's a tough decision, because there are so many out there and you just don't know where to start.
Exactly. And for so much of that stuff, it's not like you're probably not going to make a bad decision, but so often we get caught up in trying to figure out the absolute best decision instead of simply what will work and what will help me get the job done.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a tip for everybody out there who's just starting: don't get too focused on the technology. Just do it, and just deliver great content. That's what I love about storytelling, basically, because it's about content in the first place. And I think if you do it right and if you deliver great content, the rest will come, by and by. After some time, you will figure out the technicalities, but the content is the most important thing, I guess.
Right. So what is it you really like about storytelling and creating that content and refining that content?
Yeah, well, I think stories, they always touch me at my deepest core. And I think that's for everybody out there because they're kind of a universal language that help us make sense of reality. And first I thought it was some kind of flight or escape from reality, but I think it's not. I think it's more of an effort to understand the world around us and give us meaning, give us some patterns to understand the chaotic life around us. And the other thing is that stories can connect people on a very deep level because it's very universal. It's a universal language. Yeah, and if I want to get across something to people, like a public speaker or a writer or whoever, YouTuber, um, that's a really, really good vehicle to do so because people don't want to be taught or preached at because that's annoying. And I don't want to be taught. But if I take a message and I build a story around it, if I tell a story to the people, I can connect to them much, much deeper on a much deeper level, and nothing else can do this. So yeah, I think stories have a power beyond what we understand yet. And if we can grasp that power, understand the basics of storytelling, and yeah, we can connect to people in a very powerful way.
With speakers, especially when people leave your talk, they're not going to remember your slides. They'll remember that
Yes.
story you told them, though.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. You always remember those stories.
So, so what's the main thing that you teach your students when you work with them?
Storytelling, I think, is something that actually can change our lives, and I believe that. And I think people shouldn't be afraid to be creative because creativity is integral to our lives, and everybody can and should be creative. Because I think everybody has something inside of him or her that is unique and that the world needs. Everybody has something to say. Everybody basically has a story to tell. And I think many people, the reason they're not creating, they're not writing, they're not creative with their storytelling is that they haven't discovered their field of passion expertise yet. And what I want to do and what I start with is showing them very simple ways to discover their passion and their expertise and their, I kind of call it sweet spot, where they can start to be creative, where they can start to tell stories. Yeah, and I think being creative is also a very important part of becoming healthier, happier, and have an impact on the people around you. So, what my whole blog is about is that creativity and storytelling is also kind of a lifestyle that has to do with our health and the way how we spend our time, our daily lives, the way how we integrate it into our daily routines, and yeah, that's one of the things. The other thing is how the importance to finish stuff, because I think many people who want to do things, for example, write a book, they have like 10 manuscripts lying somewhere on their desks where they started to write, but they never finished. So the other thing is, yeah, I really want the people I work with to finish their stories and to have this finishing energy. And because I think if you finish, you're ready to embark on the new adventure. But if you never finish, you will never have this, like, this feeling of having accomplished something, having done the job. Yeah. And also have the right community is another very, very important point. I think being around the right people who can motivate you, who don't tear you down, but they rather build you up. Yeah, and many other things I explain in my workbooks and my free course on my website.
Awesome. So folks will definitely have to check that out. I think it's really interesting when you talk about that, the idea of just having all these things piled up around you that can create a lot of stress in your life as you have all of these other open loops. And I say that not as somebody who has pages and pages of outlines for various projects accumulated over the years in various places. But one of the things I think is also really interesting, and I've talked a lot about the idea of done is better than perfect.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. I absolutely agree on that idea because I think very often if we're creative and if we do something that we're passionate about, we really want it to be perfect. And we have kind of this idea that when it's not perfect, it's not finished. But there is a point where you need to just let things go. You can't be perfect, but you have a point where you can have this. You can't have the excuse of saying, okay, then it's not going to be good. You have to make whatever you start your project, it has to be good, but it can't be perfect.
Right. I know one of my English teachers in high school always used to say, simply, good writing is never finished.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And that's how you always feel. Like, I've published my novel. I've published actually 2 now. And I always feel like I have to go back and correct them and rewrite them. And I always have to remind myself, okay, you have to let this go. You have to move on and write something new.
Right. The other interesting thing you said there was that the idea of creativity and storytelling as a lifestyle. And that's a really interesting idea in how that plays out. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So what I mean by that is that I think everybody has a story inside of themselves. Like, every single one of us has a story to tell. And actually, we all tell stories every single day when we talk to friends, to spouses, colleagues, and we all have stories to tell. But the other thing is, many people are afraid to be creative and to actually integrate that into our lives. So I think it's something that we desire, but we're afraid of. And we need to make this first step and actually build that into our daily routines. For example, whatever you've always wanted to do, start a YouTube channel, write a book, I don't know, start a blog. You need to incorporate that into your daily life and say, I don't know, I'm going to dedicate 30 minutes a day to this one project. And it's really important to me, and I'm just going to do it. Because we keep postponing those things because we're maybe too busy. There are so many things that are too urgent. And on the other hand, we're afraid that we're not good enough. We have this artistic doubt everybody has. Yeah, and we just postpone it. And when we look back, we think, okay, I wish I had done that. I wish I had done that, but we haven't. So I guess what's really, really important is create this lifestyle around that and say, okay, I'm going to prioritize that, and I'm going to dedicate 1 hour a day or 30 minutes a day at least to this project, and I really want to do this. And yeah, that's where I think the lifestyle of being a creative and a storyteller starts. But yeah, there are so many more aspects to that, like health and exercise and healthy eating and taking care of your body and doing creative exercises. But it has to start with one little step, I guess.
Then as you start to figure out your story and start to tell your story, the rest of the things in your life can sort of be built around that and help to feed that.
Yeah, that's true.
So if somebody says, I'm not a good storyteller, what do you say to that?
Yeah, so I touched on that a little bit just now, telling that all of us tell stories every day. We just don't notice it. It's inside every single one of us. But on the other hand, storytelling needs to be learned, proper storytelling, professional storytelling, I'd say, because you have to know the difference between a story and just a simple, I've been there, I've done that. That's not actually a story. So there's no question about it that you have to master the craft of storytelling if you want to do it professionally. But it doesn't mean that you have to write. You can be a public speaker and be a storyteller. You can be a photographer, a filmmaker, or even someone who composes music. So there are so many ways to tell stories, but we need to learn the craft. And I think learning the craft is a very exciting adventure and an exciting journey. If you understand even the basics of storytelling, you have like a very, very powerful tool that you can start with. And if you want your creativity to have an impact and communicate to people effectively, you need to know at least the basics of storytelling. Yeah, and I think everybody can learn that. So there's no excuse to say I'm just not a good storyteller. It's a craft. It's not primarily a talent.
And that's fantastic. Anytime, because once it's a craft, as you said, it is a craft. It is learnable. It's the not being a good storyteller is not a defining characteristic of a person. It just means you haven't gone ahead and acquired those skills yet. And at any point, you can go ahead and change that and put in the work to acquire those skills.
Yes, definitely. That's absolutely true. So I actually think that even everybody can learn public speaking to a certain extent. And so it is also with storytelling. There are some people who have that, to whom that comes more naturally, maybe. But I've taught many people to tell stories, and even those who had problems in the beginning, they learned that, and they became great storytellers. They just have to maybe put a little bit more effort in than the others who are already naturally in that because of, I don't know, because of education maybe, or because they have been writing when they were kids, or they have been reading a lot. And, there's always, of course, some kind of background that plays a role in that, but everybody can learn that.
Absolutely. And it's sort of, and when it comes to public speaking, that's sort of the point of what we've been doing with these 75 plus episodes of 2-Minute Talk Tips, is that you can become better. You can get good at this. The bar to being good at public speaking is pretty low when you think about all of the meetings you've sat in and all the presentations you've listened to. A lot of them just aren't great because a lot of people haven't, had the opportunity to learn the basic techniques of how do you prepare a talk? How do you define your goals? How do you make PowerPoint slides that are actually effective? And all of these are things that you can learn and that you can put a process in place, and you can become, effective and better than the vast majority of random presentations that you're going to encounter. And it's not deep, dark secrets. It's simple things that you can do.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And I think that this has something to do with kind of barriers in our thinking, because people just assume they're not good in public speaking, for example. They're not good in storytelling. I don't know why, because maybe they had problems writing in English class, or they had problems doing presentations in school when they were kids or something. And from that experience, they have like this thought that's in their minds that's telling them you're just not good in that. But that's wrong. And if you can break that thought and start learning the techniques, you'll actually learn that you can do those things.
Absolutely. So much of it is about our mindset and about how we learn to start approaching these things when we're young, the environment we're in, whether we're encouraged to do something that helps us stand out, or we're discouraged from standing out, and all of those things come into play. And oftentimes we don't even know those powerful intrinsic forces that are at work within ourselves. So a lot of times it's like, you could spend a ton of time unpacking that, which would be great and really helpful, or you can start by just applying techniques.
Yes, definitely. And I would argue that about creativity as well, because some people think, there's like this, there are people who are like technically, mathematically wired, and there's the other people who are artists and creatives. But I think that's not true, actually. If you look at Da Vinci, for example, he was an artist and a scientist. So I think everybody can be creative if we just break down this barrier in our thinking and this pattern. And if you, for example, just start out doing some creativity exercises every day, you'll learn that you can be really, really creative.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of, when we talk about things like engineering, there's a ton of creative stuff that goes in there where somebody figures out how to make a major leap or how to tweak a design. They're applying a lot of creativity, which often comes from finding a new way to do something within the restraints that the constraints that they have to deal with.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, when I studied media technology, which is a Bachelor of Engineering degree, it was I really quickly realized that it's all about problem solving. And it's kind of the same with storytelling or with everything else you do. It's creative problem solving at its core. And that's really cool that those things are so similar.
Absolutely. So one of the things I think is really interesting is, just how stories are such a powerful use of language because, obviously we, stories have their value mainly in communicating with others, although they do help us define ourselves as well. But that, of course, means that language has an impact on that. And as someone who, I speak English, and really that's about it, aside from some high school and college Spanish 20 years ago. And I can speak some Cantonese as long as we're only talking about some things I can get at dim sum. And I have some Japanese food language as well. But aside from that, I don't really have any of that deep skill in other languages. And you speak well, especially from an American perspective, a tremendous amount of different languages to be able to communicate with that, and even communicating very clearly here in a language that is not your native language. So one of the things I'm wondering about is there something fundamentally different from one language to another that impacts the way you tell stories in that language? Does that language put different languages put different constraints or impacts on the stories that you tell?
Well, I think you have to consider the connection between language and culture, because you cannot see language like separately from culture. So, having said that, storytelling, as I said, is a universal language, but a lot of it is also formed by culture. So the way how you tell stories, for example. So when you tell a story, you need to know your audience and you need to know their cultural background. So there are universal principles, and there are also audience-specific principles there that are influenced by language, culture, upbringing, and so on. For example, I grew up in Middle Asia, which in a Russian-speaking home. And when I was 10, we moved to Germany, and then I lived in England for several years. And it's really odd because I feel mostly at home in England, which is quite strange. So I'm fluent in 3 languages, and I speak a little bit of French as well because we learned it at school. Yeah, it's hard for me to tell, to be honest, because there's no culture where I can say, okay, that's my culture and that's my home, because I grew up in so many cultures. But I can see it from a more objective perspective, I guess. And having said that, it's really important to know your audience and to know their culture, whether you're writing a story or whether you're doing public speaking. I don't know if you've grown up in Asia, in China or Japan, for example, it's completely different to Europe and completely different to Africa, for example, because the cultures and the understanding of life is so different. But on the other hand, I think it will help you to understand the culture if you read the stories from this culture, for example. If you read like not ancient, but old Russian fairy tales, or even popular Russian literature, you can understand the people far, far better than if you don't. You can understand their culture, you can understand the way they're thinking, you can understand how they're reacting to things just by knowing their literature and knowing their stories.
Yeah, I suppose that makes a lot of sense especially if you think about the stories that we grew up listening to as kids. Yes. Really helped shape who we are, and those dominant stories that all the kids in a culture listen to shape their perspectives as adults, even if they don't think about it often.
Yeah, definitely. And for example, if you speak to an audience of another culture, I'd really recommend just dive a little bit into their stories and get familiar with their literature, their stories. And maybe if you tell a story in your speech, you could pick up some storytelling things from there, or just pick up that story in your speech. I think this will really connect you to the audience.
Very, very true. And even if you can, and what you find is that when you're talking to an audience, even if you customize only 5% or 10% of your content and make it really specific to them, they start to feel like the entire thing is all about them and all custom and specific to them, giving your audience even a better experience of your talk.
Yes, definitely. And on the other hand, they'll have the feeling that you studied their culture, that you were interested in them and that you know them, and that this is all, like you said, it's all about them right now, and they will have more trust in you, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. People will trust you when they believe you care about them. And
Yes.
best way to show someone you care about them is to listen to them.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I totally agree.
So your whole background with storytelling, it really all comes together in your novel Prometheus Rising, which is, a fantasy sci-fi dystopian novel set in Scotland. So can you tell us, with your background, it's like amazing. And then it's like, I remember reading about that. I'm like, well, Scotland? Well, this will be interesting. So can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so this book is actually a product of my cultural background in history, but also my love for the Scottish Highlands and Braveheart, which was my absolute favorite movie since I was 9 or something, and my fascination with dystopian novels. And in the book, the protagonist, who is called Adama, he's trying to save a friend from his youth from the secret labor camps the government has installed all over the British Isles in the outer areas. And he's also fighting his doubts about whether the government is right or the rebels living in poverty are right, and so on. And this all plays out in a not too distant future. And there are so many elements that flow inside that story, like historical research of past regimes, because my ancestors, even my grandparents, they suffered from the Soviet regime back in Kyrgyzstan and in Russia. And my German ancestors, they had like this connection to the Third Reich, the Hitler regime. And I studied a lot about that and brought some of those elements in. I also did some scientific research about predictions of the future, and many things in this book are based on facts I found in literature and history. And there's also this thing about poverty and a free life versus being wealthy but a slave to the system, and also the Prometheus myth. The Greek Prometheus myth apparently plays a role because I'm kind of trying to understand who he was, half god, half man, who gave fire to the people and helped them rebel against the gods. And it has what it means today, basically, because I think Prometheus has become a symbol for freedom nowadays and for rebellion. And all of this kind of comes together in this novel, and it will be a trilogy.
Awesome. There's sounds like there's just a ton of themes in there, and really seems like a great way to dive deep and start exploring things. And I think what's really interesting there is when the way you talk about that is the connection to your own family history and your family connections that help inform your storytelling here, and that tie deeply into major historical and cultural impacts on your family and all that stuff we were talking about, where the stories of a culture, they're not just the fairy tales, they're the major events that impact that culture, that impact how everything comes together.
Yes, definitely. And especially when you hear that, from your family members, actually, when they tell you, because this is another powerful thing about storytelling. If you just hear it in the news or read about it in the history book, you're not really moved. But when your grandmother tells you her own personal story and what she experienced and those horrors they went through, it really touches you, because this is the power of storytelling. Actually, you're really moved not by facts, just saying, okay, this regime went from this year to this year, but by those personal things people experienced.
It's one thing when you're told that, 10,000 people experienced this, or 20,000 or 100,000. That's just a number. But when you can point to a specific person and this is their experience, this is what they went through, that just connects with us so much more deeply.
Yeah, and I think it's a great lesson to derive also for public speaking, because it's really worth it getting personal, on like being on a personal level at some point and telling your own story to the people as well, so that they can connect to you, because this I think this will be much more powerful than just presenting facts.
So when you're not busy diving deep into history and doing research and creating trilogies and acquiring additional languages, you started your own podcast.
Yes, I started it. It's the Story Artist podcast. It's connected to my Story Artist blog, basically, and it's all about creative living and storytelling, like my blog is as well. So I have every 2 weeks I have a new episode. Once a month, I speak to a professional in that area. It might be a writer, a blogger, a creative. And 2 weeks later, I explore with my listeners one of those ideas or themes from the interview in further depth. For example, I talk about topics like money and creativity, or how to succeed as an artist, but also things like writing unforgettable characters and writing mind-blowing first chapters, and things like that.
Interesting. So as a bi-weekly show, but what you're doing is essentially, it sounds like then each month has a different theme that enables you to go deep in it, with your guest followed by.
So I start the month off with an interview, and then from that interview I take one topic that I really liked and try to get deeper into that as well. And it's kind of, I think my speakers, my guest speakers, are those who influence the topic of the month, probably.
And I think that's also one of those other interesting things too, when we look at how that ties back into the stories that people tell when they're giving a talk, is that your story doesn't have to cover absolutely everything. In fact, one of the, some of the best stories are when you get specific and get narrower and draw it down and get more detailed about this specific thing and go deep, instead of trying to go wide and just cover as much stuff as possible.
Definitely, yeah. So storytelling is all about the details, actually. So even when I teach my like the people that subscribe, or my students, when I teach them to do descriptions, for example, and that's what all other good storytellers do. They don't focus on describing the whole room, for example, in general, but they focus on little specific details that pop out to you and that give you a feeling of the atmosphere of the room in 2 or 3 sentences, and that's it. But this can be so much more powerful than being general.
Yeah, it's like, when you're giving a talk, you're often limited on time, so you choose those very specific details that are going to matter, that are going to have the impact, and go deeper on that. And
that's what people will remember, right?
Exactly. And you've mentioned the storytelling course on your website, and we've talked a little bit about that. Who is typically going to benefit most from that coursework and from studying deeper? Who should consider taking it?
Yeah, so it's a free email course in addition to the workbook, and my workbook is like a routines workbook, 8 routines you can build into your life to be more creative. And it provides basically over the course of 8 weeks the basics for storytelling and creative lifestyle changes. And the course is for everybody who just wants to write stories, basically be creative and live a more sustainable, long-term creative lifestyle, to reach their visions and their goals. So I focus a lot on authors and bloggers, but it can help everybody from all creative fields, like musicians or artists or public speakers as well. So especially it's focused on those who just start out with storytelling and those who are struggling to get things done in their busy schedules and maybe feel overwhelmed with the information and the to-dos, and they just don't know where to start learning storytelling and where to begin with their creativity. And that's what I try to break down for them and make easy.
Absolutely. And I think when we talk about that too, one of the things to keep in mind is, we talk about public speakers as people who are doing this activity, but what's helpful to keep in mind is that public speakers are really, bloggers and musicians and salespeople and marketing people and all of these other fields where the speaking is something that we are called to do in our profession. And so regardless of your background, learning how to tell these stories and be creative in your core career then spills over into things that you can apply when you're called upon to talk about that to a much larger group.
Yes, definitely. And I have to tell that I know many authors or bloggers who are also public speakers. So it kind of ties into those things, or many public speakers who want to write a book that they can sell or present at their events, So it's it kind of all is connected, I'd say. And being a public speaker I think, is a very creative task to do.
Absolutely. And it's a heck of a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Maybe not for all the introverts out there, but
yes.
Having said that, I think being an introvert can also so you can't say, okay, I'm an introvert, I'm not a good public speaker. That's not true. You can be an introvert and you can be a great public speaker and have fun.
Absolutely. There are a lot of introverts who do a fantastic job on the stage, in part because, a lot of the challenges that many introverts have is the anxiety and just the sheer volume of energy it takes to deal with people one-on-one and small talk and, conversations. And once you get up on a stage and you have a talk to give or a presentation to conduct, that stuff is gone. You can then just sort of live in what you're talking about. Pay attention to what the crowd reaction, make adjustments, but at the same time, it takes an entirely different kind of energy than the, going up to somebody and saying, hi, how you doing? How's the weather today? That makes many introverts cringe.
Yeah, it's true. So I to be honest, I'm an introvert myself, actually. But what I've learned is that having this, this instant feedback from your audience is so amazing. Because, for example, if you write books or if you're blogging, you don't have this instant feedback. So, like you said, you can't see the face of the person facing you and their reaction at once. You have to wait for comments or, reviews for your book, but that's not the same. But when you have this instant feedback, it can be so encouraging and so rewarding, actually, because you know that what you say and what you help to, what you're trying to do for those people, it really matters to them and it really impacts them. And it can be so motivating and so rewarding.
That is awesome. So if folks want to know more about you or what you're up to, where should they go?
Yeah, so I have two websites. Basically, one is my nonfiction storytelling and creative lifestyle website, which is storyartist.me. And there you can also find my podcast. I also have a YouTube channel. And then there's another one for my fiction books, which is dwink-author.com. And you can find my free dystopian prequel novella there and just download it. And my first book, of course. Second book is just in the making right now, and I hope it will be out in autumn somewhere.
Awesome. And we'll have all those links as well over at 2minutetalktips.com/Diana.
Thank you.
So Diana, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I really, really had fun, and I hope there were some things that helped your audience.
I think there's been plenty.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
I enjoyed this conversation about culture, language, the importance of story, how creativity can be learned, and so much more. What did you think about this chat with the story artist? Let us know in the comments over at 2minutetalktips.com/Diana. Get Diana's free novella, Shaughneke's Tale, the prequel to the Prometheus trilogy, at dwink-author.com, or just go to 2minutetalktips.com/Diana for all the links. Check out Diana's storytelling course at storyartist.me. Share this episode with an aspiring storyteller by asking them to visit 2minutetalktips.com/Diana. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.